Good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for continuing to support the work of the Center for International Relations and Sustainable Development, Southeast Europe's leading foreign policy think tank. We are continuing with our Corona dialogues, online discussions with leading intellectuals and experts from around the world, trying to bring better understanding and more light to the developments in the world. Tonight, our guest is one of the great sages of Russia's foreign affairs. Professor Sergej Karaganov is the Dean of the Faculty of World Economy and International Affairs at Moscow's Higher School of Economics. A man of enormously distinguished biography and bibliography. He was at some point a deputy director for Europe at the Russia's Academy of Sciences. He was a close associate of the legendary Yevgeny Primakov, former Russian foreign minister. He also served as presidential advisor to both Boris Yeltsin and Vladimir Putin. He is author of tens of books and hundreds of publications. He's the founder of the now famous Validai Discussion Club, as well as the founder of Russia and Global Affairs Journal, Russia's leading foreign policy publication, amongst many other appointments and functions both in Russia and around the world. Good evening, Professor Karganov. How are you?
How are you? I've lived a long life. I mean, if you are old, I mean, you are responsible for a few things you have been doing. You are also right. Yes, I did some things over all these years.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us. And might I ask you, where are you at the moment?
I'm in my faraway a hunting lounge. I mean, about 130 kilometers south of Moscow, because of the lockdown, and because I am 60, more than 65, I'm 57. I'm been forbidden to go to public places and to Moscow. So I'm here. Or I have to get a special permission, which is doesn't need. So I'm sitting here for about 2 months, watching animals, starting to hunt, reading uh, not only professional literature but good literature, which is even more.
Oh, well, there are advantages to that. It gives you time to think and to catch up with your reading. But you mentioned the COVID-19, and obviously this is something that has shaken the world as of lately, and it's a very difficult situation throughout the world. Uh, Russia seems to be hit particularly hard. Today, it's probably over 400,000 cases by now. This is the third largest number of infections after the United States and Brazil. Not too high a mortality rate, so it seems like the Russian doctors are doing well in terms of fighting those who are infected. But I'm going to ask you something else, something that seems a little bit puzzling from the outside, and this is that President Putin has chosen to take an unusually low profile in this crisis, which is not terribly typical of him. It seems like more that local governors and doctors and experts were much more exposed with regard to handling of this, which is not the case with other countries in the world. So my question to you is, first of all, would you agree that President Putin has decided to take a little bit lower profile? And if yes, why was this the case?
Well, nobody knows what it is, and no easy to read a pandemic because the world has seen pandemics even in this century, which were, I mean, 10 times or 20 times harder. We don't know the outcome. And on the place of Mr. Putin or Putin, I would have kept an even lower profile. We'll see who will, how it will end up. I'm much more concerned about not about the pandemic, but about the possible repercussions, including the fact that pandemics is used as a cover-up for non-action or a cover-up of for previous mistakes by many of the international. So caution is the best one could possibly choose. But it's of course it's not a win-win. It's a lose-lose situation anyway, because we have this problem which we do not how to tackle. It's bad enough as it is. It was doubled by the fact that, as I've said, many elites in the world have chosen it to push aside their real agenda and their previous mistakes or impotence. And it was doubled once more by the new international informational milieu, which makes it, I mean, absolutely overwhelming. We will only talk about that, and instead of talking about many other things which are far more important.
But when it comes to Russia's domestic agenda, it definitely derailed some of the processes in Russia, and I refer in particular to the process of the changing of the constitution, which was started right about the time when the pandemic struck the world. So, what is your outlook with regard to the pace and the end game, if you will, of the Russian constitutional process?
Probably the changes in the constitution will pass. I mean, in a month or in a month and a half, in a month. However, as I've said, I'm much more concerned about the fact that we are not dealing, say, with overripe problems in the economy. We were on the verge of pushing a lot of money into investment in the economy to speed up our development, which has been very slow. Instead of that, we are dealing with what we have to deal with. That is the bigger problem, as I see it for Russia. But it is not the Russian problem. I mean, it's an international problem, as I've said. This epidemics or the fuss about this around these epidemics have derailed us from doing many important and useful things which we should have been doing for quite some time and which we have not been doing. I mean, ecology, climate change, social problems, inequality, all these and many others. All these problems which have been hanging over us for quite some time have been pushed aside, either by these epidemics and the beta or by United States taking a course towards open-ended containment of China. So we are in a way we are our attention and our efforts have been shifted from necessary towards towards also necessary, but short term.
So I was just reading the other day that obviously one of the issues that hits Russia particularly bad is the price of oil, and the global prices are going down, including the price of oil, which is at arguably historical lows. It says that Russia's Russia's budget is balanced when the price of oil is $42.5 per barrel, and now it's much below. But I'm going to ask you a deeper question. Russia is the world's largest country and arguably the world's richest country when it comes to natural endowments. It has enormously sophisticated elites, and it's probably a country with one of the best educated populations in the world. It has enjoyed a streak of 20 years at least, one can argue, of political stability at home. So what is the reason that after all this, Russia's economy still depends so heavily on the price of oil as its founding factor?
First of all, I mean, oil is not a curse but a blessing. Why not? I mean, if you have oil, use it. It's a good question, as well as many other natural riches. Second, now we only are living under, have been living only for 15 years under more or less normal circumstances. Since the 90s and beginning of the 2000s, we were collapsing. It's only from the early 2000s when we started to get out of that mess which we have incurred on ourselves during the late 80s and late Gorbachev and Yeltsin years. So we suffered a lot. So, but then that's obvious. The second thing is, of course, that our reforms were extremely ineffective. First of all, we went for a massive privatization without protection of private property by law. And that is a recipe for disaster. The private property was big private property was illegitimate in the eyes of the most of the population. It was not protected by the law. So this combination provided for unusual high level of corruption, because in order to protect your property, which is illegitimate in the eyes of the population, you have to go either to the state, that's corruption, or to the bandits, or both. You know that. Or else you have to export it. So we suffered a lot. It's only now that we are ceasing to export our capital and starting to deal with the real things. In the meantime, of course, we survived. That was the main thing. This revolution was deadly. I didn't believe that we would survive. By the beginning of the 2000s, I said, "Oh, come on! It might be that just simply God have forgiven Russia for the sin of communism, because we were doomed."
Oh well, but one thing that certainly did hurt the prospects of the Russian economy over the past 5 to 6 years are the sanctions that were imposed on Russia by the United States, but also by the European Union. And it happened in the aftermath of the Ukraine crisis in 2014. Now, I'm going to ask you a hypothetical question, but I think intellectually challenging and interesting. If you were able to now turn back the clock to 2013, say, so pre-Maidan and the developments that led then to this situation where the relations between Russia and the West are in such a poor shape, what would you advise the Russian leadership to do differently from what they ended up doing in 2014?
I have no ifs. I advise the Russian leadership to strike back much earlier. We procrastinated for too long, until there was a sense that a big war is inevitable, because that would have been the result of Ukraine getting into NATO, which was which is obviously in the cards. So we should have we should have stopped trying to appease earlier. But we were, of course, as I've said, poor. Then we thought that you could trust. Somebody thought that one could trust our Western partners. So we procrastinated for much too long. The best solution would have been, of course, to make a nuclear alert when Yugoslavia was bombed. Probably that would have saved Ukraine and many of us and Serbia and Yugoslavia.
Mhm.
But we were weak. We were economically in shambles. We were the leadership group were morally morally, I would say, rotten in many ways. So we yielded, and that was a huge mistake, both morally and politically, and eventually economically. But as to the 1914, the confrontation between Russia and the West was inevitable, and it was building up since 2008 or 2009. By 12, 13, I called all my friends in the liberal camp, and I said, prepare for an open confrontation. Be aware that you'll have to take sides. It was absolutely inevitable. As I've said, a bit too late.
Are you ruling out the possibility of, or you think it's still a threat, that there could be further changes and boundaries in the border between Russia and Ukraine in a way similar that Crimea happened?
We'll see what happens. Well, Russia is not interested in acquiring new territories, and we have said that we are ready and we are respecting formal sovereignty over Ukraine. The question is whether Ukraine survives or not. I'm not sure, because it is going down and out continuously. From it is the only country in the former Soviet Union which has been deteriorating through the last 30 years. It was
Mhm.
probably the richest place in the former Soviet Union. Now it is the poorest place in Europe. And I know that, and I wish that they survive or muddle down, but we'll see what will come out in 10, 15, 20 years. But we're not interested in new territory, especially in the territory of Ukraine, which was one of the most developed parts of the Soviet Union with a lot of investment, and the Ukrainian elites have bled its country white. It's now, in very bad shape.
So, what is now? How would you agree that Russia's relation with Europe is also in a pretty bad shape? And what is your outlook? What is your prediction when it comes to the future of the relations between Russia and
I,
the European Union?
I'm I'm optimistic. First of all, of course, but realistic. We'll see where Europe is going. It is muddling down for the time being, at least. It could not be a very effective partner, even if it wishes. But we are interested in having a normal relationship with Europe or with most of the countries of Europe. We have already went over the threshold. Now the relations with most European countries are getting better every day. And I assume that the time will come when we will have a much more constructive relationship with most European countries. The question is, however, is not only about Russia. Russia has changed dramatically during the last 10, 15 years. That is, it's turned east. It found its new home in Eurasia. Now, more than 10 years ago, more than, I think, almost two-thirds of our trade was Europe. Now it's only European trade and Asian trade equal each other. And that's Russia has tremendously strengthened its hand with the relations with our European partners over the last 10 years. So we are looking for a new approach model with many European countries, if not with the European Union, but with the European Union too, if it proves to be a reliable and effective partner, which now it is not quite. But when it will be done in an absolutely different framework. Previously, most of the Russian elite wanted to join Europe as an apprentice. Now we are offering a big project of Eurasian, pan-Eurasian integration with Europe, including Europe or parts of Europe.
But now there is a little bit of a different reality, at least after the COVID-19 crisis, which had accelerated certain geopolitical trends. And probably the most consequential geopolitical trend is the worsening of the relationship between the United States and China. So my question to you is, in the context of what you just said, if there is a continuation in this deterioration of U.S.-China relations, and if we end up in like something like a new Cold War between the United States and China, you're saying that Russia is more and more economically turning to Asia, but that was before the Cold War. If the Cold War happens, first of all, do you believe that there's going to be a Cold War between the U.S. and China? And if there is one, what is going to be Russia's role under such circumstances?
Well, first of all, of course, I mean, the parallel is incorrect. I mean, it's not a Cold War like it used to be. It's different, but it is a all-out confrontation, and United States are executing a containment strategy. There's no question about that. But it will be absolutely different because China is a very different country from Soviet Union was, but it has a vibrant economy, and unlike the Soviet Union had in its late years, it has a society which is also vibrant and which is very enthusiastic. And very important, Soviet Union had two fronts. One in the West, another had a confrontation with China. Now China in the East has a friend, a powerful geopolitical friend, on which it could rely. So United States would probably lose this containment, or will have to adjust, which I hope it will. But it will. But we will live through that for at least 10, 15 years. But again, now because of this fuss around this pandemic, many cards are shifting. So I could not predict what will happen 2-3 years from now. Normally, I'm making predictions, and I'm rarely incorrect. But now I'm refraining from any kind of predictions because it's a black swan, and a lot of things are simply moving, and also we are living in a absolutely unclear and fuzzy information environment. We do not know what is happening, by the way.
But for example, let me put it in a very practical terms. Something that is definitely going to be happening in the next 1 to 2 years, which is the rolling out of the 5G networks all around the world. And at the heart of this controversy is Huawei, which is right now the world's leading company when it comes to the 5G technology. So Huawei is becoming target of directed American sanctions. There's every reason to believe that this is only going to worsen. So if countries around the world, I'm not talking about Russia. Russia is a very special and very big and a geopolitical power. But we're talking about small countries like Serbia, for example, that has a strategic partnership agreement with the Huawei of all companies. So if the Americans, supported or not so strongly supported by the European countries, but if the United States comes to a country like Serbia and says, look, if you do not dismantle the Huawei equipment, you are going to become subject of American sanctions. What should a country like Serbia do under such circumstances?
Well, first of all, you have to decide for yourself. That's not, but knowing Serbia, I think United States will be sent to hell.
Well, that's a very fair prediction. That's a very good prediction.
Of the country all too well. I don't think that, and also I think that United States is battering everybody. It's punishing everybody, but it's not giving anything to everybody. It's a lose situation. If you are an ally of the United States, you're on the losing side because they only demand, they do not give anymore. So it's up to you. But Serbs, of course, I mean, are very brave people. If they want, I mean, they could go into an alliance with the United States, which would be a disaster. But one could do inflict disaster on you.
Recently speaking about a concept of a new non-alignment in the context of future role for Russia in global affairs, in case there is this kind of a bloc division that might happen in the world. Could you tell me a little bit more about this non-alignment?
Well,
the new
we are thinking about the new geopolitical and geoeconomic placement of Russia, and I think the best place would be the balance of the northern Eurasian country, uniting to the extent possible Asia and Europe to the extent possible. Being closer, of course, to China, but not being too dependent on China. We know that Russians are unable, physically or mentally, they're unable to subdue to anybody. And China is too big and too strong, so we would have a too close an alliance. But we will. But it is a very useful partner. But we will be supporting, and we are supporting, independence and sovereignty of all countries, including Serbia. By the way, I mean, we are de facto doing that already, because one of the things which are not known all too well, what is that Russia, by doing away with military superiority of the West, which it had, first Europe then the West, had for almost 500 years, freed the humanity from the Western yoke. Now you are much freer, because then to choose, or every country is much freer to choose its own path of cultural, economic, and political alignment, de facto. But and I think we should transform this role of Russia into a diplomatic standing. We have already done away with this predominance of the West. Although we did away with the base of the Western predominance in the world. Soviet Union did it, by the way, but then all of a sudden Soviet Union collapsed. And it seemed for a while that the West has returned to its dominant positions in the world. But then we resurrected ourselves. It's the most basic feature of the contemporary international relations. The end of the dominance of the West, because it's lost its base, its military superiority.
But I'm going to ask you again about the non-alignment, because of course Yugoslavia and Serbia, as a part of Yugoslavia, played a special role in the non-alignment of the 20th century. Would you consider a possibility of actually formalizing the non-alignment of the 21st century along the lines that you had described, or would it just be like a loose relationship of global relationships of sovereign states?
First of all, I think that there is the non-alignment movement still exists. Unfortunately, Russia has not been paying too much attention to it. It still is there. But I think it should be new, and we are calling for a new non-alignment. And that is, I mean, freedom and sovereignty, more freedom and sovereignty, economic, political, and cultural for most of the countries in the world. Non-block system. So, and I think if I have a crystal ball, and if we live through this 10-15 years of turmoil, the world will more or less look like United States plus. Maybe some of Europe will be in that plus. Then there will be what we call big Eurasian partnership, which will be which will not be a bloc, but hopefully a cooperative endeavor with a lot of free countries able to choose whatever their peoples want to choose. We are not interested in building new blocks or joining new formal blocks. We wanted to join the West. We wanted to join NATO and European Union, but then we were rejected. When we were rejected, I was absolutely amazed and even became afraid, because the offer to the West was so generous that when it was rejected, I thought that they wanted to deliver coup de grace, kill us. Then I found on the.
So why did they reject it? Why did, I mean, Russia offered to the West to become a part of the West. You say part of NATO. Why do you think
if we would have become a sovereign but a part of the West, the balance of power in the world would have shifted definitely towards the West, and of course we wouldn't have seen the so rapid growth of China and Asia. But the West lost this opportunity, so it has nobody to blame but itself. I mean, I also in the 80s and in the 90s, I offered many of the concepts of Russia getting closer or with the West, persuaded Yeltsin to even to apply to NATO, but we were rejected. As I've said, it was so stupid and unwise that when I understood how stupid and unwise it was, I lost respect to most of our partners there.
So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about the Balkans. And obviously, for Serbia, the most important and neuralgic question is the question of Kosovo. So Russia is the key supporter of Serbia in the international fora when it comes to Kosovo. It was the Russian threat of a veto that stopped the Security Council endorsing the unilateral declaration of independence of the authorities in Pristina that took place in the year 2008. And as a result of this Russian position, there is still a situation where the issue of sovereignty over the territory is still hanging in the balance. According to Serbia, this is part of Serbia, according to Resolution 1244 of the Security Council, that is unambiguously part of Serbia, but many countries have recognized Kosovo. However, Kosovo cannot join the United Nations because in order to join the United Nations, one has to pass a resolution in the Security Council, and the position of Russia is very clear there. Now, as of recently, there is a flurry of diplomacy led by the United States that even picked a special envoy. President Trump picked a special envoy, Mr. Grinnell, that is working with the leaders in Belgrade and Pristina towards a final deal Now, nobody knows what this deal is, but the leaks out there, and there are many of those leaks, they suggest that it could be some kind of partition, of territorial demarcation that would essentially mean the partition of Serbia and the Kosovo joining the United Nations as a result of this. So if Serbia agrees to a partition and signs the so-called comprehensive normalization agreement that, for example, American administration put it in front of Belgrade and Pristina, would Moscow support this in the Security Council when it comes to Kosovo's membership in the UN?
There are three answers to the question. First, the United States and even Europe has lost interest in Balkans, in spite of all blah 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 which is going there. We see the amount of funds going to your region. Second, we see how reliable are our American partners. I mean, that's not a zero, that's minus. They couldn't deliver on anything. I'm not sure whether Europeans are able to deliver at this juncture too, though. I mean, they have some funds, at least. So my answer would be: it is up to Serbia to decide. If Serbia decides for a solution of the Kosovo crisis, which it has on its hands, with yielding some of this additional lands to Kosovo and then finishing the de facto state of war, I mean, we will support. If Serbia does not choose this solution, we will support Serbia. We are very strict on the question of national sovereignty. It is our principle par excellence.
There's a certain relationship that Russia was developing with another country in the Balkans, and this is Montenegro. Since independence of Montenegro in 2006, Russia has been building a very strong relationship with Montenegro. Investments were made. Millions of Russian tourists ended up going over those years to visit Montenegro. And right now, Montenegro, under the leadership of Mr. Djukanovic, has taken a very different path, and it has taken a path to NATO membership. Now, a lot of people are finding lots of parallels between Mr. Djukanovic's type of rule in Montenegro and Mr. Vucic's type of rule in Serbia. And let's say that there is this deal on Kosovo that we just talked about, and you say, like, okay, Russia is going to support whatever Serbia, in other words, whatever Serbian government decides to officially do. And let's say they do this deal with Kosovo under the American tutelage. But what happens if, just like Mr. Djukanovic did a few years ago, Mr. Vucic goes on to do more of the same thing and starts steering Serbia towards membership in NATO? Would this still be of no interest to Russia, referring to Serbia's domestic affairs and not willing to hear?
We will be pathetic towards, even more sympathetic towards our Serbian friends, but of course we will not support them anymore, because that means that unfortunately Serbia would have lost its national spirit.
Thank you. So this is certainly something that lots of us in Serbia very much appreciate. I'm now going to switch to a different gear. We're coming to our famous Blitz section, in which you don't have to explain your answer, you just give the answer. And I'm going to run you through a list of countries. And for each country, the question is the same. Which foreign country has the greatest influence, not necessarily deterministic, but larger than others, in the following states of entity. So I'm going to start a list of questions one by one. You give me your answer. You don't have to explain anything. So the number one is Palestine. Who has the greatest influence there?
On Palestine, probably the countries of the Gulf.
Azerbaijan.
Russia.
The United States.
The United States.
No, the answer has to be a foreign entity. Not necessarily deterministic, but bigger than others.
Then, of course, China, I mean, and Russia. United States is totally concentrated on China and Russia. And Russia is, I think it should be even Russia, because Russia has been accused of, of changing the political course of that country. So obviously that's Russia. There's no question about that.
Okay. Then Russia.
Nobody. No, there's those that can. God.
Germany.
Germany. United States.
Turkey.
Turkey. United States.
Hungary.
I think China, eventually.
Italy.
Italy, Germany.
Iraq.
Iran, of course.
Iran.
Maybe India.
Bulgaria.
United States.
Serbia.
Russia.
That's fascinating. Thank you. That was the Blitz section. A lot of things to think about. Your short answers gave us a lot of meat to dwell on in our follow-up sections. Thank you for that. Now we're going to go to the last section, which is questions collected from our followers and members of the think tank, most of which are students from the region of Southeast Europe. You don't have to go very deep unless you want to into the answers, but some of these questions are very, very interesting, I promise to you. So I'm going to start off by a question from Alexander. He's a student from Niš in southern Serbia. The question is, who is the second most powerful man in Russia?
The Prime Minister.
The Prime Minister.
Sure. It is unquestionable.
According to the Constitution or in real life as well?
It is Constitution, but also he has a real levers of power. There are some other influential people, but there is no question that Prime Minister is the second most powerful person in this country.
Marina from Belgrade. The question is, what is the single largest threat to the Russian Federation?
Well, the single largest threat to the Russian Federation is equal to to all nations in the world, and that is a possibility of sliding towards a nuclear catastrophe, which is still there, especially because of the many technological reasons, but also because of the decline of many elites in many countries, including the United States, first of all. As to the Russian threat per se, that is, I mean, relaxing too much and stagnating. We have, according to our national character, we achieve something and then we relax. We have been relaxing for 10 years. And I'm afraid, and we were on the verge of getting out. So, and now because of this crisis with the epidemics, it might be that we will again postpone, I mean, energetic policy of development. That is the threat. There is no question about that. Stagnation.
The question from Istvan from Subotica, the town in the north of Serbia. Would Russia militarily intervene in case there is a war between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and how?
There will be no war between Armenia and Azerbaijan, or big war. There could be skirmishes, because they know what is at stake.
So Igor from Belgrade is asking the following question. Out of these three people, who do you trust most? 1. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. 2. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And 3. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan.
I think I would trust Ayatollah more, in spite of the fact that I'm culturally very far away from him. Because he's a man of very strong principles, obviously. Some believe that his principles are too strong.
Fascinating. Number 5, Miroslav from Novi Sad. What is the single biggest foreign policy mistake of the Russian Federation in the 21st century?
It happened by basically on the verge, and that was when we agreed de facto to the bombing of former Yugoslavia. That was a moral crime. It was a crime by NATO, but it was a moral crime by Russia to de facto agree and even to negotiate the crisis. I am still ashamed of this fantastic moral and political mistake.
It's a very good answer, and therefore I like it so much. So I'm not gonna point your attention to the fact that it was in the 20th century, not in the 21st century. But the answer is very good. So I'm gonna go on to the next one, which is from Anna. Anna is from Belgrade, and she says she asks. Do you support India's claim for a permanent seat at the UN Security Council with the power of veto?
Yes, I think that at least 2 or 3 countries should join eventually the Security Council, including India. But the problem is that the balance is so hard, and in days of confrontation like ours, you could not reform the institutions, even if they are outdated. Because if you try to reform the Permanent Security Council, it could end up in a confrontation between the 5 members, and in the further collapse of even of this institution, on the background of when all international institutions, almost all, are collapsing, and when the world is rapidly moving towards chaos. So not at this juncture, but eventually, yes.
So Sava from Novi Sad, with the benefit of hindsight, was the investment in organizing the Sochi Olympics and the Soccer World Cup a worthwhile financial investment?
Yes, of course. Sochi and many other cities have become much more comfortable. And it is obvious, and that these monies were persuaded as always during this huge huge happenings. But the infrastructure was in many cities was resurrected or repaired. I mean, new airports were built. As to Sochi, Sochi now is a world-class winter and summer resort. And those Russians who, because of sanctions or because of their connection with security services, or because of COVID and the like things, want to have fun not leaving our country, now has an excellent opportunity there. We have a world-class winter resort plus a world-class summer resort in the same bottle. I mean, so that was a fantastically good political and economic investment. So yes, it was worth it.
Okay, so Lana from Zagreb is asking you, which foreign country do you admire most and why?
I like two countries. I mean, first Serbia because of its national character. Second, an opposite country, Netherlands, because it's so small, it is so neat, it is opposite of Russia. That's why Peter the Great loved Holland so much, because it is the opposite of Russia. It's the other side of Russia. I still love Holland more than many other countries in the world, and I'm proud to be the first, maybe the only Dutch professor in Russia, because I was given at the end of the 90s an honorary degree there.
Yeah, and you were teaching at Groningen at some point, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I was given an honorary, some kind of a degree by several universities, by a consortium of universities. I was teaching in Groningen and in several other universities. It was my only teaching experience in my life. Then, after 20 years, I became a dean, and I built up an institution. Not being a regular professor, I was only this kind of a special name professor.
Next question comes from Slobodan. He lives in Vienna. He's obviously Serbian, but he lives in Vienna. Apart from its nuclear and conventional weapons arsenal, what is the greatest strength of Russia?
Greatest what?
Strength.
Greatest
of
what?
Russia. Strength.
Moral character. Moral character, of course. I mean, there's no question about that. We never yield, and we always win. It's very obvious. I mean, all countries were subdued by Genghis Khan, and both, by the way, both Russia and China were parts of the empire. But China eventually digested. We threw them away. Then came Karl the 12th, which conquered half of Europe, of Sweden, half of Sweden. Then came Napoleon and Hitler. We are the only nation in Europe which defeated all. I mean, it's a part of a national character. There's no question about
that. Fascinating answer. Nina from Belgrade. Is Edward Snowden a hero or a traitor?
A moral hero, but a political traitor. That happens.
So, Andre, that happens. Andre from Munich. In case there is a unilateral action on behalf of the United States to attack Iran's nuclear facilities, what would be Russia's reaction?
Very negative, but it is their war, and I hope that wouldn't happen. But the United States now is a totally unreliable and irresponsible player. But we will not, of course, fight for anybody far away from our borders.
Stefan from Sarajeva.
a third world war, a nuclear world war.
Stefan from Sarajevo, why did Russia decide to save Bashar al-Assad?
4 or 5 reasons. There were many. One is it was not about saving Assad. First, was about keeping away the terrorist threat as far away as possible from Russian borders. There were a few thousand fighters from former Soviet Union fighting with Daesh, and we knew that if they would have taken over, that would inevitably spread towards us. We were killing them. The second reason was, of course, training our military force. And the third, which was done excellently well, all senior officers have had now an excellent school. The third was to show our new weaponry and to strengthen deterrence. The third is the fourth is the principle. We are supporting sovereign nations, and the fifth is stopping the sequence of color revolutions which brought disaster and death to millions, which had now, thanks God, this sequence have been stopped. I hope forever. But it was not Assad. I'm sorry. It was. The French were, especially, and some others were keen on Assad. Assad was there, and we came to the rescue of the illegitimate government. If it wouldn't have come in half a year or by year 2016, Syria would have been overrun by Daesh or by Islamic State, and we would have a qualitatively harder problem, including Europe, because we would have had a big country, with a rather potent military force and with a lot of armaments, controlled by these Islamic radicals.
The last question of all questions for tonight is from Sofia, and she is from Belgrade. What is your message for the youth of Serbia?
Well, I like your country, and I've been there, and I know its history. But I think I will give a message, the same message I would give to youth of Russia. Love, be independent, don't trust the waves of information which engulf us. Develop your intellectual independence. Then you are the winner. If you are a part of this new informational society, swept by the waves of this society, you are bound to lose. So develop inner independence as much as possible. And I have 2 phones. One, I need it, unfortunately, but I have also, but I use more a robust button phone with 2 SIM cards, with no you could send and get SMS, not much than that, but it has 28 hours of battery, and it is absolutely gorgeous. And I advise all my younger people, use that, and be as far away from as possible from that.
The smartphone.
Then you would win. Of course, you have to use it as we are using it now. But of course, but I know how much time is wasted in browsing information. Now I have for the first time in my life, I have a lot of time. I had no plans for writing big things, and also I don't want to write big things now because the situation is so blurry. and I don't want to make a mistake and which I would undermine my credibility. But I see how much time I'm inadvertently spending on this. It's fun, but it's intellectually derogating, and it absolutely. And I'm becoming more stupid. I mean, if I spend the day on, so that is why I'm reading books. I mean, a really big literature world, Russian, etc., running. That helps me a lot, even if professionally it doesn't help me. And there is
Well, thank
nothing.
you very much, Professor Karaganov. It was a fascinating discussion. I knew that it was going to be thought-provoking. I knew it was going to be interesting. We are privileged to have worked with you in the past. You were an author in our journal, The Horizons, but we would love to have you visit Serbia yet again as our guest once this crazy situation is over and once the world travel starts again. We would love to have you in Serbia. For now, thank you very much for joining us from your hunting lodge and outside Moscow, and wishing you best of luck and wishing you to continue with the productivity that you've been enjoying so far. It was a privilege to talk to you, sir.
I mean, the best of luck to all our watchers, and thank you very much for showing interest in my modest remarks.
Thank you very much.
Modest.
Good night, and all the best to you and your family.
Thank you.
Bye.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.